In this video, we're going to learn about variables in Matlab. So there are four different things. We're going to learn first what are the restrictions in Matlab about especially how to write variable name. There are certain rules that you have to follow. Then what is the maximum characters that you can have in a variable name. Then meaningful variable name is kind of recommendation. It's not a required thing. And then we're going to also learn the importance of understanding the variable that you define, which is user defined, versus the built-in variables in Matlab. So let's see these examples in Matlab screen. So I have a command window here. So I'm going to create a variable that you are already familiar with. So let's say x equals to 5, for example. I'm going to put semicolon so that I don't want to see this variable. So then I wanted to decide that I'm going to say that a variable name is kind of longer. So distance to Detroit, for example. So I'm going to say distance to Detroit. So if I say distance to Detroit equals to 300, or maybe a little bit more than that, but say 300 miles, I'm going to put a semicolon. And notice that it kind of changed the color because of these spaces. So Matlab is not recognizing this as a variable name. So let's see what the error message I get. So there's an unrecognized function or variable distance. So it's recognizing this as a separate, this would be separate, this would be, everything is separate, it's not considered. So in variable naming, there are only three things are allowed. Space is not allowed. So what are those things? One is the first one is the letter. Then I'm going to put a percentage sign as I type in so that it will not show me an error message. Letter. Then you can have digits. And then you can have underscore. So these are the only three things allowed in a variable name. Always keep that in mind. Nothing else, no other character, nothing else can go in a variable name when you define a variable in Matlab. However, that's rule number one. So let's call it rule number one. Okay, so I'm gonna hit enter. Then I'm gonna create rule number two, that variable must start with a letter. Variable, so I cannot have a variable name that starts with a digit or with underscore. So it must start with a letter. So these are the only two rules that if you follow in Matlab, then you can create variables perfectly fine. So now let's go back to, I really wanted to use this variable name that sounds like this distance to Detroit. However, I have characters, I'm sorry, I have letters, but I don't have a digits and I don't have underscore. So since a space is not allowed, so what if I'm going to use the up arrow key to bring that thing back, and then I'm going to eliminate this space. I'm going to put underscore and eliminate the space, put underscore. Now you notice that it's all turned black, and it will take as a variable name in Matlab, and you will see the variable in workspace as well. So distance to Detroit. So basically if I extend this, and you will see that distance to Detroit is a variable now. So now the question is, how long can the variable be? So if you're trying to count, like, there is a function, built-in function in Matlab. So I just wanted to say LE, length of the variable. I'm going to say, let's say length, length, and in the parenthesis I'm going to put this variable name. So you will tell me under quotation, because these are all characters, not a numerical number or digits. So I'm going to put inside the quotation, I'm going to put Detroit, distance to Detroit, and it will tell me exactly how many characters that I used. So I used 19 characters. So let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Space underscore is 9, 10, 11, then this underscore 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So there are 19 characters, including the underscore. and it started with a letter, so it was perfectly variable. Now, how big of a variable name can you create? So there are total like 63 characters allowed in Matlab. 63 characters. We hardly ever use that long. And if it is variable name is way too long, it's just not pretty. The code is not going to look nice. So, but so that's the rules how to get the variable. So let's see an example. So I wanted to put 5 y equals to 10. Do you think this will be taken as a variable name? It's all black. So if I put a semicolon there, it's not going to print, but is that going to take a variable name? Let's see. The rule number 2 says the variable must start with a letter. So it is not a letter, so it should not take as a variable name. And there you go. There's the error message. So did you mean sometimes it gives you suggestion? So instead of 6y, it's just suggesting if you mean that. So I could, by the way, write y6 equals to 10. Then it would be perfectly fine. If I hit enter now I can see y6 equal to 10 because it starts with a letter. So let's clear this screen. And few things we learned here, the rules, few rules, and a function, we're going to use length many more times later on, and maximum number of characters can be used. And if you noticed or not, when I wrote distance to Detroit, I wrote the whole word. What if I write it x equals to 300? I actually meant by x equals to that 300 is a distance to Detroit. So instead of writing that, I just wrote x equals to 300, and then I say distance to Detroit. It is perfectly fine if you write and say in miles, like with the comment, but this x is just a symbol that doesn't really represent distance. What if instead of writing that, what if you write d equals to 300? To me, it is a lot more meaningful. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here also. So I have this comment, and then in addition, I have d equals to 300. To me, it's a meaningful variable name. So, or, why didn't you take it? So because I put a colon instead of semicolon. So now you will take it. Okay, so so what if I write dist equals to 300? That is perfectly fine. Still, it's not that much meaningful, because what if you have a bunch of other cities that you are trying to find the distance to Detroit, distance to Chicago. So you might want to do like this d underscore Detroit equals to 300. And of course, you can write comments at the end. And then let's say d underscore Chicago. I'm not sure how many miles. I'm just going to roughly throw in, say, 800 miles from here. So maybe a little less than 800. But, so then you can write comments. So this is another way of meaningful. This actually means something. So anybody would read d for maybe for distance or so. So it's a good practice to always write variables as much you can with the meaningful words or wording using underscores. The last thing that we wanted to do with this, there are some built-in variable name. Let's say we use this. I'm going to redo x equals to sine pi by 6. I know it would be 0.5 because that's 30 degrees. So what if I create a variable that name is sin? So sin is pi divided by 6. So that's my variable. Now I wanted to reuse this x equals to sine pi by 6, and watch what happens. So it says error message, array indices must be positive integer logical values. All it is doing, it is considering this as a variable name, not as a sine function, because you use this built-in sine function as your variable in your list. Look at right here, it's a sine. It is a very dangerous practice. So please do not use whatever variables that you already know. Do not use those built-in variables as a function or built-in functions as a variable in your code. So a quick summary. So we learned rules, how to like two rules. Then we learned how many a function length, how many characters in variable can have in Matlab. And then third one is you shouldn't use the built-in variable. So you know the course is another built-in variable. You know can is another built-in variable. SQRT is another built-in. ANS is another built-in. So there are a bunch of those variables that you will already be familiar with over time. So at least make sure you do not use them. So if there is some variable that you will never use in regular practice and accidentally say you wrote dsolve. So there is a function called dsolve, but if you don't use it and using that as a variable name in your code, it would be probably fine. But it's better not to use any built-in variable name. Hope that helps for this session. So I'll stop this here.